Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The FCC is going to be fining two companies over $22 million for RDOF defaults. These are defaults that had already been declared, but now the fines are in. We'll take a look at that. And one of them is from the person, or I should say the entity that won the most RDOF funds. Be right back. Thank you for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So this happened here when was this? What was the date on this? Was it today or yesterday? Oops, sorry. Crazy stuff going on there. Date, December 5th. There you go. So that was just yesterday. So FCC proposes $22 million in fines for rural broadband action defaults. So I have linked to this page in the description of this video where you can download all of these different things. A couple of them I will look at, one in more depth. So basically, when you go up here, there'll be the actual order on review, and this is a long document. I'm not going to look at this. There's some information in here. This is kind of the short description of what's going on here with the two providers. And the two providers are Etheric, I guess it is, Etheric Communications, and then LTD Broadband. And then there's a list of the Appendix B is a list of all of the census block groups that you probably want to look at or may want to look at. So I thought I'd go through this and just read some of the details. So we'll start with, I'll call them Etheric Communications. Not totally sure how they pronounce that, but Etheric is a wholly owned subsidiary of Etheric Networks Incorporated, which provides custom broadband services through a combination of fixed wireless and fiber technologies to residential and business customers across 10 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this is one of the companies that I think was proposing, for the most part, fixed wireless. So they would have come in at a lower price than somebody, let's say, who was going to be doing all fiber. And that would be one reason maybe they won. Etheric timely submitted its short form application to participate in auction 904. That was the RDOF auction, and was a successful bidder. WCB, the wireless something board, it's the FCC board, declared Etheric to be in default on May 23rd, 2023, and referred the company to the Bureau for Enforcement Action. The Commission finds that Etheric apparently committed 244 violations by defaulting on 244 census block groups subject to forfeiture, which places the company's base forfeiture at $732,000. Their total assigned support for those groups in default subject to forfeiture amounted to $218,641,793.80. But there is a cap on this, so thereby capping the maximum possible forfeiture at $32,796,269.07, which is 15% of their defaulted support, subject to forfeiture in the RDOF auction. Because the base forfeiture is less than 15%, the 15% cap established in the RDOF order, the Commission finds that the forfeiture amount of $732,000 against Etheric is appropriate here. So not as bad as it sounded there from the beginning, but that's still a lot of money for them. And then we've got LTD Broadband. Now, LTD was they were the largest winner in the RDOF auction, over $1.3 billion. They were at the top of the list. Again, I believe they might have been submitting, I can't remember if they were the ones submitting some fixed wireless as well as, mostly fixed wireless, I can't recall. But anyway, I do recall they were the top winner, $1.3 billion. You see here, LTD is a broadband service provider operating in the Midwest U.S. They timely submitted their short form application to participate in the RDOF auction, was a successful bidder. FCC declared LTD to be in default on August 10th, 2022, and referred the company to EB for enforcement action. LTD's application was lacking in a number of ways, First, LTD failed to provide proof of eligible telecommunications carrier designation. You had to be an ETC or become one prior to, right there when you were said that you won, you had to get your ETC within a certain period of time. And that is so that you can provide phone service in a state. And that's because you have to be able to provide, if you're going to do an RDOF build, you have to provide voice service as well as data over that. and they did not do that. Second, LTD did not show that it had available funds for all project costs that exceed the amount of support to be received for the first 2 years of its support term. In particular, they determined that LTD would not be able to meet the initial prerequisites of a new term sheet for a loan and equity fundraising round submitted within its final financial plan. Third, LTD did not, as required, differentiate between anticipated project costs and related funding for each of the areas for which they were seeking support, nor did they explain why their apparent assumption that all deployment costs are equal across all of its winning bid states and rural regions within each state might be reasonable. So in other words, sounds like they just kind of said all of these deployment costs are going to be the same wherever we are. And obviously that's not going to be the case. You've got different areas, different geographies, different difficulties in areas. So they didn't look like they had really done a good, I guess it didn't look like they had done a good analysis of what this was going to cost in every area. Fourth, a number of the cost assumptions on which LTD based its deployment costs were unrealistic, raising concerns that the overall determination of deployment costs was too low. Fifth, LTD did not provide evidence that it could cover the necessary debt service payments over the life of its loans. Sixth, they failed to provide specific and localized project designs. Instead, they applied an unrealistic one-size-fits-all approach for the vast areas where it would be required to deploy last-mile fiber to every serviceable location and the supporting middle-mile core infrastructure. So it looks like they were talking about fiber the whole way here, fiber to the home. But again, like their pricing or their cost models, they did not provide designs specific to the areas. LTD's technical submissions reflect a lack of understanding of how significantly their business needs to scale up to achieve equipment purchases, hiring, construction, deployment, maintenance, operations, and customer service for the sizable network of LTD's remaining winning bids. For these reasons, and based on the totality of the long-form application, the expansive service areas reflected in its winning bids, and its inadequate responses to the Bureau's follow-up questions, they concluded that LTD was not reasonably capable of complying with the Commission's requirements. Accordingly, they find that LTD apparently committed 7,238 violations by defaulting on that many census block groups, which places the company's base forfeiture at $21.7 million, approximately $21,714,000. LTD's total assets assigned support for the CBGs, or census block groups, in default, subject to forfeiture, amounted to $1.13 billion. Yeah, that was how much they won, basically. Thereby capping the maximum possible forfeiture at $169,516,016.01, if I read that correct, which is 15% of LTD's defaulted support subject to forfeiture in the RDOF auction. Because the base forfeiture is less than the 15% cap estimated in the RDOF order, the Commission finds a forfeiture amount of $21.7 million roughly against LTD is appropriate here. Additionally, we propose to hold GigFire LLC jointly and severably liable for the total amount of LTD's forfeiture. This is interesting. LTD and GigFire, a new entity that apparently was recently created by the owner of LTD, appear to share so many operational traits that they share a substantial identity, and as such, we propose to hold them jointly and severally liable for the auction default violations. When analyzing the two companies, the factors that enter into a determination of alter ego status are substantial identity of management, business purpose, operation, equipment, customers, supervision, and ownership between the old entity and its successor. Holding GigFire jointly and severally liable is appropriate here because the same individual, Mr. Corey Hauer, appears to control both LTD and GigFire. Further, we have evidence suggesting that Mr. Hauer has transferred most of LTD's assets to GigFire. To the extent that LTD continues to exist, and in fact has retained assets, LTD and GigFire are not easily distinguishable as they apparently share the same owner, manager, business purpose, for example, broadband service, and address. Notably, GigFire was apparently created only after penalties were proposed for LTD's conduct during the RDOF Phase 1 auction, and after penalties were proposed for LTD's default on its winning bids in that same auction. Therefore, it appears that Mr. Hauer created GigFire to carry on the work of LTD using LTD's former assets rather than for a distinct business purpose. This raises the possibility that GigFire may have been founded for the purpose of evading liability for LTD's action. Accordingly, Out of an abundance of caution, we find that LTD and GigFire are apparently alter egos for purposes of liability and thus jointly and severally liable for the proposed penalty. So LTD, set up this other operating company, and it sounds like it's basically doing the same thing that LTD was doing, and the FCC is saying, wait a minute, it looks like you may be doing that to evade any defaults that are coming, which here they are. So they're not going to let them do that. So anyway, this very interesting here because, again, LTD being the largest of the RDOF operators that was, eventually found in default. Now, that was prior. Both of these were prior to the announcements of BEAD funding and how much each state would get, which is good because, obviously, LTD being the largest and Etheric. Oh, and I forgot to show you this other thing. I was going to just kind of go through here. And Etheric having a good number of blocks as well. These would have been areas that would have been, would have been committed funds and then not available for BEAD funding if they had not done that prior to BEAD. And I'm assuming since that was done prior to the June 30th date, obviously well before for LTD Broadband, and Etheric was in May, the end of May, then these census block groups were returned to being eligible for BEAD funding, assuming that they still were at that point. So, and as you look at this, so here we've got Etheric at the top. Just take a little bigger here. So we got them at the top, and we're looking at California, and they don't have that many as we go through here. It looks like we got California for them, and that's it. So we got California for them. Then we've got LTD Broadband. So this is page 4 of this 106-page PDF that I'm looking at here. And you can download this from that page that I have linked to there. So you've got California, Illinois. Sorry if I'm making you nauseous. Got Illinois is next. Then we got Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota. These lots of census block groups: Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, South Dakota, Texas, and I think we got Wyoming. Oh no, Wisconsin at the end there, probably. Yeah, Wisconsin. So there you go. Lots and lots of census block groups that you can see that were defaulted on. But again, all of these areas should be included as unserved areas, assuming that, again, they still were at the time, as of June 30th, that these would be eligible. The states would have been eligible to get funds for this, and they would be now looking, obviously, they would not even be considering this default because they would have already been looking at these areas as being eligible for BEAD funding as they look at what they're going to be doing with their funding, each state. So there you go. Anyway, interesting news today, or actually yesterday. So appreciate it. If you found it interesting, if you give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate that. And if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button and ring the bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot for joining me today for Broadband Deployment News. See you next time. Bye-bye.